So I'm going to show you one of my favorite glute stretches to improve hip flexion and external rotation for a more comfortable deep squat. So we're going to place a pad directly under the knee for a little bit of comfort. Now, how this differs from traditional floor glute stretches that you'll maybe see in yoga, like pigeon pose, is this hip is pushed way too far back in reference to the knee, and we're not getting a lot of effective load through the femur to move posteriorly in the hip. So we're not allowing this posterior glide of the femur to place our hip in a more advantageous position to flex. So here's how we'll set up. We'll start with the knee directly under the hip. So now gravity is forcing all of the load to come through the knee all the way up through the back of the hip. Now from this position we will externally rotate, so bring the foot inward actively. We don't want to move it so far inward that our whole pelvis just kind of turns with it. So if you see that from the front, this is all I'm going to use. The more I go here, the more it just kind of spins my pelvis with it, okay? So from this position, knee directly under the hip, little external rotation, I'm just going to anteriorly tilt the pelvis to create that hip flexion as opposed to just moving back, because now that force isn't being transferred through the top of my kneecap here. So I'm going to anteriorly tilt the pelvis. Now from here, I'm going to hinge my torso forward, kind of like I'm doing a deadlift or an RDL. So I hinge my torso forward. Now I could sit the hip back just a little bit more, and I have all that load going through that posterior lateral hip. So you should feel this all through the back pocket here. Now what we can do is we can shift that hip slightly outside the knee. We can even turn our belly button across that working side knee as well. The most important thing is we're maintaining this leverage here. Now what we can do is get really light on our hands here. So I'm trying to lift my hands, get really light, and really press down so the knee directly down into the ground. So I'm creating a lot of isometric tension through the glute here. Hold that 10-20 seconds. Relax. Try to anteriorly tilt the pelvis a little bit more. Hinge at the hip just a little bit more. We can bring our hands a little bit further out. Create that tension again. Get light on the hands. And relax. If this is a little bit pinchy in the hip and you're missing some hip flexion, then what you can do is elevate your hands, maybe a box or a medicine ball, to take you a little bit out of hip flexion. So maybe that would look like this. So my torso isn't as leaned forward toward the ground, so I could just start a little bit higher up, and then from here we can adjust intensity. So give this a try and retest that squat afterwards. You should feel like you're able to sink into it much deeper on that side.